The night sky over the ruined valley shimmered with unnatural light. Once this place had been a quiet stretch of forests and gentle rivers, the kind of scene a child might sketch with clumsy crayons. Rolling hills, blue streams, birds that dipped lazily across the horizon. Now it was a graveyard of mountains cracked open, their stone veins glowing with molten fire. The air tasted of iron and smoke. In the distance, a lone figure strode across the scorched ground, every step striking like a drumbeat against the silence of the world. Kratos, the ghost of Sparta. His bare scalp gleamed beneath the embers of war, his ash-white skin stained with streaks of dried blood. In his hand, the blades of chaos burned with restless hunger, their chains whispering across the dirt like serpents ready to strike. He had slain gods, titans, monsters beyond imagining. Yet now, as he raised his gaze towards the horizon, a flicker of confusion, not fear, but curiosity, traced his scarred features. For out of the fractured air, a sound unlike the clash of war echoed. A gentle pop, almost comic, like the snap of a toy balloon. And then he appeared, a round blue figure, floating slightly above the ground, propelled by a bamboo copter no larger than a child's hand. His eyes were wide, his smile impossibly innocent against the smoke and flame. He carried no sword, no armor, no scars, only a small yellow pocket stitched upon his belly, glowing faintly as though it contained an infinity the world could not yet understand. Doraemon. The contrast was absurd, almost laughable. The warrior god-killer towering in grim silence, and the robot cat from a future dream, humming as if he had wandered into the wrong universe. Yet in the heart of the cosmos, absurdity was often the prelude to judgment. "Who are you, creature?" Kratos demanded, his voice low, the words vibrating through the fractured stone. "I'm Doraemon," came the cheerful reply. "I've come to help." There was no irony in his tone, only warmth, only the innocence of a being created to guide a boy through the trials of childhood. But Kratos had lived long enough to know that even innocence could mask power. The chains in his hands rattled, flames licking across their blades. "Help?" Kratos growled. "There is no help in war, only survival." Doraemon tilted his head, his ears, or rather the round spaces where ears should have been, twitching slightly. "You're angry," he said softly, as though speaking to a child in the throes of a tantrum. "I can fix that. I have something in my pocket that can make the anger go away." He reached into the yellow pouch. Reality bent as his small paw vanished deeper than logic allowed, grasping through infinite layers of possibility. When he drew it out again, he held something ridiculous, a tiny pink heart-shaped balloon. He blew into it once, and the balloon expanded to the size of a man's chest, glowing with gentle light. "This," Doraemon explained, "is the heart calm balloon. If you touch it, it will remind you of kindness, of love, of all the good things you've forgotten." Kratos stared at it in silence, then slowly he laughed. It was not a laugh of humor. It was harsh, metallic, echoing with years of pain. "You think such toys can touch me?" He raised a hand and slashed the balloon with a single blade. It burst into sparks, the fragments dissolving like fireflies. Doraemon's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You really are stubborn," he whispered. "Nobita was like that too sometimes." The name meant nothing to Kratos, but the tone carried weight. A warrior knows when a foe has stopped treating the battle as a game. The earth shook beneath them as the tension thickened. Doraemon reached again into his pocket. This time he pulled free a small door, no taller than his own body, painted bright pink. He placed it upright in the air, opened it, and a burst of golden sunlight streamed from the frame, revealing a completely different landscape beyond. A meadow of flowers, a gentle brook, the hum of cicadas. "This door can take us somewhere peaceful," Doraemon said. "We don't have to fight," but Kratos was already moving. With a roar, he hurled his chain blades. The fire-lit chains whipped across the space, shattering the small door into splinters before it could close. The portal collapsed with a crack, the meadow vanishing into smoke. "You will not run from me," Kratos declared. "Stand and face judgment." For the first time, Doraemon's round body trembled. Not with fear, but with something else. He let the bamboo copter drop away, landing softly upon the stone. His paw hovered over the pocket. His voice lost its childlike lilt, becoming calm, measured, almost ancient. "Very well," he said. "If you want judgment, then you'll have it." From the pouch, he drew not a toy, but a weapon from the dreams of 1,000 children, the Anywhere beam, a rod of polished metal with a crystal core. It thrummed with impossible power, the energy of futures untold. The air around it warped, humming with the echo of time itself. The ground between them cracked. Sparks leapt skyward. The first blow had not yet been struck, but the universe itself seemed to tremble in anticipation. God killer versus dream machine. Rage versus compassion. The valley would not survive what came next. The first shockwave rolled out like a bell struck by a god. Pebbles danced in tight circles. Hairline fractures spidered across the black glass of cooled lava, turning it into a mosaic that reflected two figures in broken shards, the ash-white warrior with chains smoldering at his wrists, and the round blue visitor with a pocket that glowed like a sunrise trapped behind yellow cloth. Kratos moved first. He did not sprint. He advanced like a cliff, choosing to fall. The blades of chaos flared, their links rattling a hymn of iron. He carved a downward arc that would have cleaved a boulder into screaming sparks. Doraemon wasn't there. The Anywhere beam sang, one clean tone, and reality kinked. Kratos' strike cut a silhouette of heat through empty air, howling past a blue blur that now stood behind him. "Please," Doraemon said, and somehow the word carried over the roar of magma vents. "There's still time to stop." "There is never time to stop," Kratos answered, turning with a pivot that churned ash into a cyclone. He hurled a blade on its chain. It spun outward, the hooked steel yawning like a hungry mouth. Doraemon lifted the beam and wrote a line across the world. The chain sank into that line as if into a pond. The blade kept spinning, but no noise returned. Distance stretched and folded, and with a crack like a bone bitten in half, the weapon's momentum reappeared 3 paces to Kratos' left, buried up to the hilt in a basalt column. Kratos' eyes tightened. The warrior tugged, felt the line of fate resist him, then wrenched the chain free with contempt, and closed again. Steam gusted from fissures. The moon slid behind a bruise of storm. When he reached striking distance, Kratos feinted high and swept low, metal screeched. The beam caught sparks that froze midair like a constellation trapped in amber. Doraemon slid backward, soles skimming rock, and the sparks thawed all at once, falling in a glittering rain. He did not counter. Even now, he held defense like a shield, woven of patience. The Anywhere beam tapped the ground twice, and the terrain learned obedience. A ridge sloped where there had been none. A trough opened and swallowed the next blade strike, so the metal chewed dirt instead of robot cat. You grit your teeth at the world, Doraemon said, breath steady. But you were a father in a cold place, and you learned to speak softly because a boy needed you to. Do not say his name, Kratos warned. And the warning cracked the sky. Lightning reached for them with 10 iron fingers, welding white scars onto the black plain. The scent of rain finally wrestled with the reek of iron. Kratos leapt. He was a meteor in a man's body. Knuckles like anvils, shoulders like bastions. The leap brought him above Doraemon, with the moon behind him, a judgment falling from its orbit. The blades crossed and he crashed down. The impact birthed a crater and a tree of smoke. At the center of that tree stood a pink door. It opened inward as stone shrapnel punched around its frame. The fragments curved, slowed, and fell like lazy snow. Doraemon had conjured it beneath the hit, placing possibility where doom insisted on closing. The door had no meadow now. It didn't run. It revealed an empty white room, a nowhere that could hold a blow without shattering. The strike slammed into absence and howled like a wounded star. When the door snapped shut, the violence inside it stayed contained, muffled to a dull throb. Kratos' feet skidded. He tore the door from its hinges with his left hand and crushed it until splinters screamed. His right blade punched forward, tip poised for the soft place beneath a throat. The world hiccuped. The tip kissed yellow cloth and lost it. Doraemon had stepped sideways through 2 seconds. Not many. Just enough. The beam coughed a pulse and drew a circle in the air that hummed like a tuning fork. Kratos' blade met that circle and stopped, every atom of it agreeing for an insulted instant to be still. You don't have to be the thing they made you, Doraemon said. I can give you a different way to carry it. I carry it by breaking it, Kratos answered, and twisted the still metal with such will that the circle shattered into a rain of blue glass. All of it. He shouldered into Doraemon. The hit carried bolder logic. It was not skill. It was inevitability. Doraemon bounced, rolled, and hit a pillar. The pillar lost the argument and collapsed. Dust fountained. The robot cat staggered to a knee. Servo hum ticked under his breath like a whispered metronome. He blinked grit from wide eyes and reached for his pocket again. Kratos arrived like an answer to a question nobody wanted. The next flurry was ugly. It had less art. It was hammer against drum. Doraemon's beam found some parries, failed others. Cuts scored paint. A chain looped his torso and cinched until metal squealed. Kratos yanked, pulled him close, and a blade kissed the seam where blue body met yellow pocket. The fabric smoked. Open it, Kratos said softly. The softness made the command colder. Show me the last refuge. Doraemon looked up. His eyes, even now, did not hate. The last refuge, he said, and the pocket warmed against the knife. Isn't a place. He exhaled, and the pocket sang. The sound had the weight of lullabies, of rain on classroom windows, of chopsticks clacking lightly, while a mother asked about homework. The blades of chaos, born from a fire that never forgave, flickered as if wind found them. Inside the pocket, stars woke. They were not our stars. They were diagrams of kindness. A hand reaching backward down a dark stairwell. The warmth of soup on the 4th night of winter. A wooden toy repaired with clumsy glue and perfect attention. Kratos' grip did not slacken, but something in his jaw unclenched by the width of a breath. No, he growled, and the word killed a star. The chain tightened. Tricks. They're memories, Doraemon said, and touched the blade with one paw. His synthetic pads hissed against heat. Not yours. Mine. And a boy's. And a world that tried to teach us to do better, even when we didn't want to. Kratos' eyes narrowed. He pulled the blade back to finish it. The ground disagreed. A bright red line chalked itself under his boots. It rode a loop with schoolyard speed, giggling in geometry, and when the loop closed, gravity stepped out to take a phone call. Kratos' boots left the earth with startled honesty. He rose 3 feet. Chains clanked and clutched at emptiness. Doraemon slipped free and rolled away, chest heaving. A small blue hand dug deep. The gadget came out looking like a toy ray gun with a candy-striped barrel. "Time fumble," he said, pointing it at the warrior. "I don't like using it. It makes things unfair." Kratos bared teeth that were not interested in fairness. The ray pipped. For a heartbeat, the world stuttered. Leaves that had fallen minutes ago jumped back to branches, and then remembered themselves and fell again. The lava's skin smoothed and then re-wrinkled. Kratos' lunge repeated itself in a jitter. 1 step forward, 1 step back. A dance performed by an angry mountain that hated choreography. Doraemon didn't attack. He transported 100 meters with a flick of pink chalk, reappearing atop a caldera lip. He shook ash off his whiskers and peered down, voice carrying on the new wind. "You fight the way I used to fix problems," he called. "As if breaking something hard enough could make it the shape you need." "You know nothing of my life," Kratos shouted back, and the distance did not dilute the gravel in the words. "I know loneliness when it walks," Doraemon said. "I know a person who keeps moving, because if he stops, the noise catches him. I know a boy who thinks he is not enough, and a man who is terrified to tell his son what kind of father he has been." Kratos' stare knifed distance. Thunder rolled out its shoulders. He leapt again and slammed into the caldera rim. Rock parted obediently. Doraemon's anywhere beam traced a lattice through the air and built a bridge from light and intention. He danced backward, feet light because they had to be. "Then hear me," Kratos said, stalking onto the bridge like a storm, learning to walk. As one who has lifted a son from the snow and taught him how to breathe in a world that tries to stop lungs. There is only what we do. I have been the end of gods. I will be the end of you. "Then you'll be alone again," Doraemon replied. His eyes shone, part charge indicator, part something older. "And I will still worry about you." The bridge could not listen without breaking. It broke. They fell 30 feet onto a shelf of rock that rose from the caldera like a tongue. Kratos landed in a crouch and shoved. The shelf bucked, trying to spit Doraemon into the magma lake below. The robot cat pointed the beam down and wrote "ground on fire." The fire accepted the definition for 3 surprised seconds and cooled to obsidian so he could scramble across it. Then it remembered that it was the blood of the earth and relaxed back into orange hunger. Kratos came on, relentless. He launched a blade, retrieved it, threw the second. 1 chain wrapped the beam. Doraemon dug in. Servo torque whined at the edge of failure. He couldn't let Kratos claim it. Without the beam, his other devices were tempo without melody. He did not yank back, he let go. The chain recoiled as if it had bitten smoke. Kratos, briefly off balance, took a step he hadn't planned. Doraemon reached into the pocket bear and found guilt. It came out as a mirror the size of his palm. The frame was simple wood. The glass looked soft. It wasn't a toy, it was a refusal. "Look," he said. Kratos did not accept instructions from enemies. He scorned commands. He despised mirrors. He looked, not at his face, not at the ash or the scar. The mirror of maybe showed him the one decision he had never allowed, the day he chose not to kill a god. He saw himself on a shore where an enemy knelt with empty hands and an open throat, and he saw his own arm stop. He felt the tremor that rose from his gut to his shoulder and died there, a quake that never made ground. He watched the world that followed from that one mercy. Different troubles, different roads. A boy who learned that strength could be a door held open as easily as a fist. The mirror didn't accuse, it begged. Kratos' face didn't move, but a vein above his eye hammered. The blades dimmed to a simmer. The chain loop around his forearm slackened the width of a breath. Doraemon lowered the glass. "You could still be him. I am what I become when needed," Kratos said. And that was almost gentle. The chain snapped taut. The simmer became a furnace. The warrior surged. Doraemon threw the mirror into the sky. It burst like a planet seed, scattering maybe across the clouds, where it twined with lightning, and made the bolts hesitate on their way down. He couldn't win a contest of weight. He could widen the field. He touched the pocket and pulled out a small cone printed with black stripes. Ridiculous, like party favor candy. He flicked it open. The cone inhaled the wind, swallowed thunder, and then burped a corridor of stillness that reached to the horizon. In that corridor, dust hung like pearls on invisible strings. Lava forgot to bubble. Kratos froze mid-stride. Not trapped, not helpless. Frozen the way a decision is frozen at the last instant of doubt. Doraemon padded forward, careful, as if approaching a sleeping animal. "I know you hate mercy when it's offered to you," he said. "I know it smells like pity. It isn't. It's an invitation. You've given mercy to people who didn't deserve it and found out later they did. Give it to yourself once," the blades whispered. The stillness shivered. The corridor's spell had cost more than Doraemon wanted to pay. The cone trembled in his hand. He could feel the bottomless pocket breathing raggedly against his chest. "Do you think I have not tried?" Kratos asked. The question came through clenched teeth, through walls, through winters. "I have carried kindness in one hand and war in the other. The hand of kindness burns. The hand of war knows what it is." "You were kinder than you let yourself admit," Doraemon said. "You were just quiet about it. You taught him how to tie boats so knots wouldn't slip. You learned to cut wood with the grain so the axe didn't bite crooked. You told him stories you pretended you didn't remember loving." The corridor broke. Time exhaled. Dust fell. Lava remembered its agenda. Kratos moved. He came fast enough to be mistaken for anger, and patient enough to be mistaken for peace. Doraemon raised the beam on reflex and found it snared again. The chain seized, the rod skittered from his grip, and one blade flashed. It kissed the pocket's edge. Fabric parted. A seam of yellow fluttered like a torn sunrise. A sound escaped Doraemon. It wasn't pain. It was grief for a tool that was more than a tool. He clutched the rip with both paws, as if he could pinch dawn closed. "Do not," Kratos said. And for the first time there was a hint, just a hint of apology in the iron. "Do not reach again. It's not for me," Doraemon said, small, stubborn. His voice found steel the way a child finds their feet after a stumble. He released the torn pocket and stood up straight despite the ash on his cheeks. "It's for you." He stepped back, and the ground gave him a gift. A schoolyard drawn by hands that had never held war. Chalk lines unfurled in a grid. A bell rang from nowhere. A wind carried the smell of pencil shavings and fried bread. Kratos blinked as the battlefield pretended, for 20 heartbeats, to be a place where homework is lost and found. Children's shadows ran across the cracked plain. Not ghosts. Memories cast so boldly they made light reconsider. Laughter hopped from square to square on the chalk. The warrior's shoulders squared, then dipped, then squared again. "You lure me," he accused, soft because shouting would break whatever this was. "I remind you," Doraemon answered. "I was built to remind a boy. It turns out boys grow into men who still need it." The chalk grid focused itself into a single rectangle. A door grew from it. Not pink? Wood the color of patience? The door had 3 dents where a child had thrown a ball too hard once and been forgiven. It swung open, the hinge squeaked, a sound that could build a house, and inside was a table, and on the table was a bowl, and in the bowl was a stew. And the stew smelled like the first time someone says, "I'm glad you're home," and means it. Kratos stood with the storm arguing quietly behind his eyes. Doraemon didn't step through. He turned the handle toward the warrior. "If you walk in," he said, "it won't make you less dangerous. It will make you precise. You won't need to break everything to prove you can. You'll break only what must be broken. You'll spare what can be spared. You'll spare yourself." A rumble suggested a mountain far away remembered how to collapse. The wind shifted. The stew's steam thinned. Kratos lifted his head and looked beyond the door. Not into it, beyond it. His gaze climbed the rim of the caldera, leapt the distance, found the sky. The stars were trying to come out and failing because the storm hadn't decided to be over. He closed his eyes and saw a boy with a bow frown at a knot that wouldn't behave, saw his own big hand flatten gentler than you'd think over small hands, felt the line give, felt the smile that the boy tried to hide because boys must be fierce even when they are relieved. When he opened his eyes, he put one blade away. The other he held at Doraemon's throat. "Understand," he said. And the word was a boulder, placed carefully so a stream would learn a better path. "That I do not accept mercy I did not earn. But I understand a door when it asks to be opened." The tip of the blade dipped. It did not touch metal. It told a story to the air instead. Kratos moved past Doraemon without turning his back. Warriors do not insult reality that way, and stopped before the threshold. He did not step through. "I will not go where I cannot fight," he said. "But I will take from your door what I can carry." He inhaled. The stew's steam climbed into him and made a small space warm. It was a foolish thing for a god-killer to do. It was a necessary thing for a father. He exhaled smoke and turned, the blades murmuring but obeying. "Close it." Doraemon closed the door. It folded back into chalk. Rain smudged the lines into a soft gray nothing, and the schoolyard went wherever schoolyards go when children grow taller than their desks. "I can't beat you," Doraemon said. And suddenly he sounded tired, the way anyone would after trying to hold up a world with 2 paws. Not in a way that leaves the world better. Kratos rolled his shoulders. The chains clinked like a coin flipping. "I do not ask you to beat me." "Then what is this?" Doraemon gestured at the valley, at the cracked moonlight, at the steaming caldera, at the argument the weather was having with itself. "If it isn't a fight, it is a measure," Kratos said. "Of you, of me, of what the world needs from us when it goes wrong." Doraemon looked down at the torn seam of his pocket. Threads frayed like sunbeams pulled too thin. He pressed the edges together and rubbed gently. The yellow brightened, the rip shrank, but it did not disappear. "The world always goes wrong," he murmured. "I know," Kratos said. Silence landed between them. Not awkward, useful. The kind of silence carpenters admire when a joint fits so well it cannot squeak. The storm slackened. The moon came out with the exhausted bravery of someone who has cried and chosen to try again anyway. Far below, within the caldera, something ancient turned in its sleep, a pressure that recognized wrath and compassion both, and lifted its head to sniff them. Doraemon's ears pricked, even without ears. "Do you feel that?" Kratos nodded once. "The earth remembers monsters, and it remembers invitations." A ridge on the caldera's inner wall sagged, sighed, and fell inward. Magma frothed. A shape rose, oxide red and cathedral tall, shedding lava like old skin. It had too many eyes, and each one understood hunger as a theory and a hobby. It called no name because names are a courtesy. It simply was, and being was violence. Doraemon tightened his grip on the beam. Kratos' second blade lifted of its own accord, comfort finding its way home to a hand. "This is when we fight," Doraemon said. Kratos nodded again. Together, the creature uncoiled and the valley forgot that it had ever known quiet. The heat hit like a history lesson taught by a volcano. The first swipe of its limb wrote a thesis about ruin. Kratos sprinted, every stride a punctuation mark, and leapt. His chains sang. The blades carved their old alphabet on new flesh. The monster took the mark and laughed hot. Doraemon traced a sigil through air with a child's certainty. The beam flared a corridor over the magma, a bridge striped like a zebra, crossing drawn by hope. He dashed along it, paws drumming, and pulled from the mending pocket a pair of gloves, ennobled by impracticality. They were red. They had stars on the palms. "Punch-only gloves," he said, apologizing to nobody. He hit the monster in the eye. The eye apologized to him by exploding into steam. Kratos landed on the thing's back and drove a blade into a seam where magma flowed thinner. The chain dug. He used the leverage to pivot, to find the second seam, to plant the other steel. The giant thrashed. A mountain somewhere else learned empathy. Doraemon vaulted, the beam setting stepping stones, the way a teacher sets questions that teach rather than test. He landed near Kratos and pointed, already breathless with machinery running hot. "There, its heat leaves first from the joints. Cool those, slow it." Kratos grunted approval. He leapt off the creature and slammed a blade into the rock shelf. The chain snapped taut, and he slingshotted around, using weight like a poem knows when to rhyme. He carved at the joints. The blades howled. The monster slowed, confused that existence had conditions. Doraemon pulled a small, harmless-looking can from the pocket. He shook it. It chirped. "Instant river." He popped the lid and poured a ribbon of silver that refused to boil. It cascaded over a joint and hissed, a lullaby that machinery loves. The joint stiffened. The giant dipped, angry at physics. "Left," Kratos barked. Doraemon moved left as if the command had rung from a bell he used to hear at recess. The limb slammed where he had been. Kratos seized the limb with a chain, and the world decided to be impressed by leverage again. Now, Doraemon jammed the beam into a crack and wrote the word door. The crack obeyed, becoming a door that opened only in one direction, outward. Pressure vented from inside the creature with a gasp like an oven learning humility. Fire jetted at a tangent, missing both of them by a dignity. They worked, one in fury, one in invention. Two rhythms that hated each other and harmonized anyway. Heat blistered paint, scars burned whiter on old skin. The caldera's rim shed unhappy stone. The monster, cheated of being the only ancient thing in the valley, screamed and tried to remember how to be a wave. They denied the memory. When it finally fell, and everything that big eventually falls, It did not die with drama. It sighed, a house settling after a long winter, and slumped into the magma that forgave it with a sullen hiss. The lake closed. Bubbles tried to applaud and failed. Doraemon wiped soot from his face. It smeared. He laughed at himself and then winced because laughing hurt. Kratos stood with shoulders rising and falling like tides that had decided to be generous. He looked at the blue figure as the wind toured the ruins and tried to imagine them as a place that could grow grass again. "You fight like a friend," Kratos said. And it was the largest compliment in a language that had very few. "You listened like one," Doraemon replied. They stood, letting the valley remember silence. On the ground between them, one surviving chalk line refused rain. It traced half a hopscotch box and then, stubbornly, the number 2. It looked small and invincible. Kratos sheathed one blade. The other he left loose in his hand, because the world is not a fool. Doraemon touched the torn seam of his pocket again. It would take time. He would give it. "What happens now?" he asked. Kratos looked up at stars, trying hard. "Now," he said, "we carry what we can, and we break only what we must." Doraemon nodded. He lifted the Anywhere beam and let it cool in the wind. "I'll keep a door somewhere near you," he said, "not for running, for precision." Kratos' mouth did not smile. The skin around his eyes considered it and declined. "Do as you will." They began to walk, neither leading, both making the path, across a valley that had been taught, once again, how to heal around a scar. The road through the valley broke into switchbacks where old rivers had carved patience into stone. The two figures moved without ceremony, one heavy, one round, steps writing parallel lines across ash. Behind them, the caldera steamed like a wound not sure whether to close. Above them, stars wrestled with the storm and finally began to win. Doraemon walked with both paws pressed to his torn pocket. The fabric was knitting, but every few minutes it winced, a spark of yellow light blinking as though remembering pain. He rubbed the seam gently, as if soothing a child who had fallen. The beam rested across his back, quiet but not asleep. Kratos carried silence the way others carry shields. His chains jingled with every stride, not in anger now, but in inevitability. "You never asked me what I am," Doraemon said at last. His voice was careful, as though testing a bridge of ice. "I know enough," Kratos replied. "You don't. I wasn't born. I was built, made to help a boy find courage. Every gadget, every door, every silly invention, it was to make him believe he could change." Kratos' gaze stayed forward. "And did he?" Doraemon hesitated. He looked at the stars that had finally stopped hiding. "Yes, but not because of the gadgets, because he kept choosing even when he failed. I only reminded him he could try again." The ghost of Sparta grunted. "Then you and I are not so different." Doraemon blinked. "Not different? You're a godslayer. You remind others," Kratos interrupted. "I break what would break them. The shape differs. The burden does not." They reached a ridge where the world opened into a plain of ruins, what had once been a city. Towers leaned like drunks against one another. Windows glowed faint with fire. The smell of salt drifted in from a sea that lapped against broken docks. Somewhere faintly people screamed. Doraemon's ears, or the empty circles where they once had been, twitched. Survivors. Kratos had already drawn a blade. His chains rattled like wolves tugging a leash. And hunters. Shapes moved in the ruins. Not human, not beast. They were the kind of hybrids the warp loves to sculpt, flesh knitted with brass, mouths full of sermons instead of tongues. They scuttled along walls, eyes glowing red as embers, dozens, then hundreds. The city was their hive, and the survivors were only bait. Doraemon reached into his pocket and pulled free a flashlight. It looked absurd, plastic and cheerful. He flicked it on. The beam stretched, thickened, and became a corridor of sunlight that refused to yield to night. The creatures hissed, retreating into shadow. "Go," he called, pointing toward the screams. "We can get them out." Kratos said nothing. He leapt, chains already spinning. Where Doraemon brought light, Kratos brought ending. The first wave of hybrids died in a cloud of sparks and ichor. The second rushed and found hellfire waiting. The third shrieked prayers and were silenced mid-syllable. Doraemon darted between alleys, sunlight beams sweeping, pocket-vomiting gadgets, faster than reason could argue. A collapsible ladder sprang 50 feet high to pull children from a burning tower. A safety blanket spread into a dome to shield civilians from falling rubble. A tiny whistle, blown once, turned into a siren that drove predators backward, clutching their heads. Kratos cut paths through streets that should have been dead ends. Walls fell before him. Creatures broke on him. He was a wedge hammered into the heart of the hive. Blood, oil, and ash coated him until his skin was the same color as the ruins, except for the red tattoo that would never fade. They converged in the square. A handful of survivors clustered in the fountain's dry basin, families, elders, children with eyes wide as open wounds. Doraemon raised a paw. "It's okay," he whispered. "We'll get you out." But the air soured. The hive had a priest. It came limping from the cathedral, its body swollen with borrowed faith. It wore a crown of bent steel, its ribs split to reveal an organ that pumped molten ichor. The hybrids chanted, their voices scraping stone. The priest raised its hands, and the shadows of the ruined city deepened into trenches of black. From those trenches, tendrils rose, hungry, endless. Kratos spat in the dust. Another monster. Doraemon's paw trembled over his pocket. No, something worse. It's trying to rewrite the rules. Indeed, the square bent. Gravity became curious. Time blinked twice in confusion. The survivors whimpered as the ground beneath them shifted like water. Doraemon turned to Kratos, voice steady despite the quake in his chest. "We hold the line, you cut it down, I'll keep the people safe." Kratos nodded once. That was all. He leapt into the trench of black with blades howling. Doraemon faced the survivors. He spread his arms, pocket glowing like a lantern. From it he drew not weapons but promises. A parachute that unfolded into a dome of sky-blue silk. A toy train that grew into a rail of steel leading toward the sea. A bag of sweets that turned into warm bread in every hand. The children's sobs eased into quiet. The parents' eyes lifted from despair to a sliver of belief. Behind them, the fight shook the square. Chains clashed with tendrils, fire with shadow, fury with faith. Kratos roared like an avalanche breaking through centuries of stone. The priest screamed verses that cracked glass and bone. Doraemon whispered to himself as he guided the survivors toward the train. "You're not alone, Kratos. Not this time." And as the night city burned, two impossible figures stood back to back in different battles. One against the weight of monsters, the other against the weight of despair. The storm above them thickened again. Something larger was coming. The square convulsed, as if the ground itself was gagging on the ritual. Kratos' chains burned white, cleaving tendril after tendril, each stroke tearing the priest's scripture from its rotten skin. The hybrid shrieked louder, 1,000 voices scratching the air like broken glass, throwing themselves into the fray with fanatical devotion. Doraemon herded the survivors toward the glowing rail his toy train had unfurled. The engine tooted, a comic, cheerful sound absurd in the apocalypse, and yet the people climbed aboard as if it were salvation incarnate. Each carriage they filled brightened, the steel humming with the faith of the rescued. A tendril lashed toward them. Doraemon yanked the anywhere beam from his back and drew a barrier midair. The tendril slammed into the invisible wall, splattering ichor across the street. Doraemon winced, his servos whirred hot, but he did not yield. "Go!" he shouted, waving the train forward. "The sea will carry you away from this madness," the priest roared. Its chest cavity yawned open like a furnace, and from the ribbed maw erupted a column of darkness. It sought the train, sought the hope that was leaving. Kratos struck from above, his chains binding the priest's arms, the blades stabbing into the molten organ itself. He ripped downward, tearing flesh and brass apart in a spray of black fire. The monster staggered but did not fall. Doraemon leapt, pulling from his pocket a device no larger than a wristwatch. He slapped it onto the priest's crown. "Memory rewinder!" he cried. The crown stuttered, light flickering, dragging the priest through fractured moments of its own existence. Once a man, then a zealot, then a beast. Its scream shook the heavens. Kratos used that moment. He wrenched both blades wide, splitting the furnace open. The ichor boiled over him, scalding, but he did not stop until the organ collapsed in on itself. With a bellow, he ripped the crown free and crushed it between his fists. The priest dissolved into ash. The hybrids faltered, their chanting breaking into a chorus of confused moans. Without command, they scattered like roaches into the alleys. Silence fell in the ruined square. Doraemon sagged, smoke rising from his pocket. "You!" he panted, looking at Kratos. "You didn't even hesitate?" Kratos wiped black blood from his blades, eyes cold. "Hesitation kills the innocent." Doraemon smiled weakly. "And yet, you didn't kill them all." He gestured to the hybrids crawling away. "They are broken tools," Kratos said. "Slaying them wastes the strength we'll need." For a long moment, the two simply looked at one another. Doraemon, bruised and battered, yet still radiating kindness. Kratos, bloodied and burnt, radiating inevitability. Different flames, same fire. Then the sea thundered. The toy train had reached the shoreline. But the ocean was not salvation. The waves rose higher than towers, spiraling upward, glowing with malevolent light. From the heart of the storm at sea, a titanic silhouette emerged, a god of the deep, pulled by the priest's dying ritual. Its eyes were lanterns of abyssal hunger, its maw a cathedral of teeth. Doraemon whispered, "That's too big even for you." Kratos looked at him. "Then stand beside me." The ocean split. The Titan roared, and the ruined city trembled on the edge of annihilation. The sea raged like a living wound. Foam turned black, every wave dragging with it the bones of ships forgotten by history. The Titan's head rose first, barnacle-crusted and dripping with centuries of rot. Each eye burned like a lighthouse twisted into malice, sweeping beams of abyssal light across the ruined coast. Its shoulders followed, continents of flesh plated with armor grown from drowned temples. The survivors aboard Doraemon's train screamed as the rails carried them straight toward the shoreline where the beast loomed. The toy engine whistled again, valiantly, absurdly, as though it could outshout the apocalypse. Stay with them, Kratos growled, already striding towards the sea, blades dragging sparks. No! Doraemon snapped, surprising even himself with the sharpness of his tone. You can't fight that alone, and I won't let you, the Titan bellowed. The sound a tide that drowned every heartbeat in the city. Buildings collapsed just from its voice. Kratos did not slow. Doraemon's pocket flared, and he pulled free a gadget that shook in his trembling paw. A whistle carved from silver, etched with impossible symbols. He blew once. The air itself answered. Clouds split, a lattice of light crisscrossing the sky. And from that light descended thousands of tiny, shining drones, metallic birds no larger than sparrows, each carrying a shard of sunlight. They swarmed around the survivors' train, forming a radiant shield as the Titan's first wave crashed upon them. The sea erupted against the barrier, but the drones held, chirping with courage that didn't know fear. Kratos hurled a blade. It buried itself in the Titan's cheek, chains sizzling as if dipped in lightning. With a roar, he leapt, using the recoil to fling himself high above the water. His second blade sank into the beast's brow, sparks and ichor fountained. Kratos climbed like a storm, dragging fire across ancient skin. Doraemon sprinted to the coast, anywhere beam blazing. He traced sigils into the air, creating stepping stones of hardened time over the waves. His small feet drummed across them as he raced after Kratos. The Titan swung one colossal arm, and a wall of water surged to obliterate him. Doraemon yanked out the reverse umbrella, a silly red thing with polka dots. He popped it open, and the wave inverted, collapsing backward into the sea as though gravity had misremembered its rules. Ridiculous, Kratos muttered, watching from the Titan's brow. But useful. The beast reared, its mouth opening into a cathedral of abyss. From its throat spewed swarms of eel-like horrors, each larger than a warhorse, each with teeth made to strip bone. They shrieked as they arced toward the fleeing train. Doraemon's paw plunged into his pocket again and found the big light, a flashlight with a cracked lens. He aimed, fired, and the beam caught one eel mid-leap, swelling it to the size of a skyscraper. The monster slammed into its fellows, crushing them beneath its absurdly enlarged body. Chaos turned against itself, and the train's path cleared. Kratos reached the Titan's crown. With a roar, he drove both blades into the skull and ripped. Flesh parted, bone cracked. But the beast only screamed louder, its roar hurling him off balance. He dangled from one chain as the Titan thrashed, trying to fling him into the sea. "Kratos!" Doraemon cried. His pocket spat out another door, this one not pink but midnight blue. He flung it onto the waves, and when it opened, it revealed solid ground within. Kratos swung, released, and crashed through the door just before the Titan's claws snapped shut. He landed beside Doraemon on a strip of stone road that shouldn't exist in the middle of the ocean. The Titan loomed over them, eyes burning, maw dripping with apocalypse. Doraemon's round face hardened. "We need to end it, or the survivors won't make it past the bay." Kratos planted his blades into the stone and glared at the beast. "Then we end it together." The Titan dove, the sea itself breaking around its bulk. Doraemon raised the beam. Kratos raised his chains. Two impossibilities side by side, braced as the ocean god fell upon them. The sea split apart like a wounded sky. The Titan crashed downward, dragging whole storms in its wake, jaws opening to swallow city, survivors, train, and the two impossibly small figures who stood against it. Kratos hurled himself forward first, chains whistling as the blades of chaos found impossible purchase against the Titan's descending teeth. Sparks cascaded, fire spraying into the salt spray. His roar was a mountain tearing itself loose, every swing carving channels of molten light into abyssal flesh. Beside him, Doraemon braced on the conjured road, anywhere beam glowing with a radiance it had never carried before. He drew wide arcs in the air, and each stroke hardened into shining lattices of geometry. Bridges, nets, traps, written into the fabric of possibility. As the Titan descended, its jaw slammed against those constructs, shattering half, but slowing, staggering as though struck by invisible mountains. The survivor's train screamed across its impossible rails toward the horizon. The toy engine blew its whistle again, a sound absurd and defiant. Every child aboard clutched bread or blankets Doraemon had given them. Every parent prayed to gods or machines or both. Behind them, the titanic roar shook the sea into tidal convulsions. The beast lunged again, a clawed hand like a cathedral roof tearing for the train. Kratos bellowed. He leapt high, chains wrapping the claw, dragging himself onto its knuckles. He sprinted across fingers the size of warships, blades carving trails of blood and fire, until he plunged both weapons deep into the tendons at the wrist. With a heave born of hate and muscle, he wrenched. The claw spasmed, missed the train, and tore instead through the ruins of the city, toppling towers like sandcastles. "Hold it!" Doraemon shouted. His pocket glowed fever bright. He reached in and pulled free the air cannon, a ridiculous plastic tube with a trigger. He fired once. A ring of compressed air, visible and roaring, slammed into the Titan's throat. It staggered, cough thunder echoing as though the ocean itself had forgotten how to breathe. Kratos roared, leapt, and drove one blade deep into the Titan's eye. Ichor geysered, burning cold, sizzling even against his immortal skin. He swung again, until the eye burst in a rain of abyssal fire. The Titan reeled, one half blind, its bellow echoing like an earthquake that had lost its way. Doraemon's paws shook. His pocket sparked. He was running out of safe tricks. But he pulled one last device, something he rarely dared, the time cloth, a square of fabric that could age or rewind anything it touched. He spread it wide, caught the sea wind, and with all his strength flung it over the Titan's wounded head. The cloth clung like destiny. The monster's flesh around its skull rippled, first regressing to youth, then surging to ancient age, then decaying into brittle rot. It screamed as half its face crumbled, teeth raining into the sea like falling towers. Kratos seized the moment. He wrapped his chains around the Titan's throat, dug his heels into its collarbone, and pulled with all the wrath of every war he had survived. The chains burned white, brighter than any forge. The Titan thrashed, waves rising into walls that clawed at the sky. "Now!" Kratos roared. Doraemon leapt, beam blazing. He carved a door midair, but this was no escape. This was a door to nowhere, a gate into absence. It yawned black and hungry just before the Titan's chest. Kratos dragged the monster down into that doorway. The chains shrieked as abyssal flesh tore. The Titan convulsed, half its bulk collapsing into the void Doraemon had written. The rest slumped, waves shattering as its corpse dragged into the deep. The sea stilled. For the first time since the night began, silence dared to exist. Kratos stood upon the dissolving corpse, chest heaving, eyes burning. Doraemon floated nearby on his bamboo copter, pocket dimming, almost empty. They met each other's gaze across the steaming waves. "It isn't dead," Doraemon whispered. "Not completely. Something that big, it never truly dies. Kratos sheathed one blade, let the other hang at his side. Then when it rises again, we will break it again. Above them, the storm cleared enough for the stars to return. But among those stars, something moved, something vast, many-eyed, watching. The Titan was only a herald. Doraemon shivered. Kratos, I think the real fight hasn't even started. The ghost of Sparta bared his teeth. Good. The ocean lay flat as glass. But it was not peace. It was the kind of silence that arrives only when the world is holding its breath. The survivors' train clattered along the last rails towards the mountains, its whistle fading. They were safe for now. Doraemon sagged, dropping to his knees on the floating strip of road his beam had etched into the sea. His pocket glowed faint, then went dark, smoke curling from the seam. Kratos climbed from the Titan's dissolving carcass, boots dripping ichor that steamed where it touched stone. He said nothing, only looked up. Above them, the stars rearranged. What first seemed like constellations shifted, lines bent, circles turned into eyes, dozens, hundreds. Each star blinked, and then they all blinked together. The night sky was not a sky at all, but the mask of something vast pressed against reality's curtain. A single eye, the size of continents, slid closer, and with it came a hum that wasn't sound but weight, pressing on bone and thought alike. Doraemon clutched his head, teeth clenched. It's reading us. Every memory, every fear, Kratos snarled, chains rattling as though they felt the intrusion too. Then let it choke. The ocean began to rise, not in waves, but in columns. Pillars of black water, lifting into the heavens, shaping into limbs. The horizon folded inward. The stars themselves, twisted as though the universe was bending to make room. The true foe had arrived. The Titan had been only an echo, a nail clipping from the hand now pushing through. Doraemon stumbled to his feet, pocket sparking. Kratos, this isn't just a monster. It's the will behind them. A god older than your gods. My gadgets, they're not made for this scale. Kratos planted his blades in the stone road, glaring upward. Then break the scale. The vast hand of water and starlight descended, larger than the city they had just saved. Every building's ruins shivered. Every survivor in the mountains felt the quake. The eye in the heavens pulsed, and the air turned to iron. Doraemon's paw trembled over his ruined pocket. He whispered, "Nobita." "I don't know if I can." Kratos' voice cut like a scar through despair. "You can." He lifted his chains, wrapped them tight around his arms. "Because you must." The hand fell. Doraemon's eyes widened. His pocket flared one last time, and something leapt free. Not a gadget, not a toy, but a door. A door larger than mountains, painted with childish pink. It slammed into existence between the descending hand and the broken world. The hand crashed against it, and the door groaned as if all of creation were its hinges. Kratos roared, leapt, and struck the hand itself, his blades blazing, his body a comet of defiance. The mask of stars leaned closer, curious. It spoke, but not with words. With the collapse of distance, every voice in the world heard it inside their own skulls. "Little machine, fallen god, why do gnats defy eternity?" Doraemon, shaking, lifted his beam. "Because gnats bite." The door shuddered. The hand pressed harder. Kratos' chains coiled the fingers, burning white, carving lines into cosmic flesh. He was a speck, but a speck that refused to yield. Doraemon screamed, fired the beam. The door shattered, not into nothing, but into infinite doors, fractals of possibility, each slamming into the sky like nails, driven into the mask. The vast eye blinked, startled for the first time in millennia. Kratos dragged the chains, roaring, and the entire ocean convulsed. "Fall," he bellowed. "Fall, or I will tear your eternity apart." The mask of stars cracked. A scream, not of pain but of surprise, ripped the heavens. The eye receded, dragged back into its own dimension by the force of defiance. The columns of black water collapsed, returning to sea. The weight lifted. The stars returned to being only stars. Silence again. Doraemon collapsed, pocket finally dark. Kratos fell to one knee, blades buried in the stone. The city smoldered, the sea fumed, the survivors prayed, and above them, where the mask had cracked, one fragment of starlight still burned, falling slowly like a dying ember. It whispered with a promise not yet dead. "This is not the end." Kratos stood, eyes hard. "Then let them come again." Doraemon looked up at him, exhausted, trembling, but smiling faintly. "You'll fight forever, won't you?" The ghost of Sparta sheathed his blades. "Only until forever breaks." The crack in the heavens sealed, but the echo of it lingered like a splinter in reality. The ocean's surface lay calm again, too calm, like a corpse at rest. The ruined city smoked, and the faint whistle of the toy train reached them from the distant mountains where the survivors had vanished into safety. Doraemon sat heavily on the stone road that still floated above the water. His pocket was blackened, seams charred, the gadgets inside reduced to sparks and dust. He patted it anyway, as though reassuring a wounded comrade. "That was everything. I've got nothing left." Kratos stood silent, staring at the horizon, where the fragment of fallen starlight still drifted down. It burned with a slow, dangerous grace, a coal that refused to die. "What is it?" Doraemon asked, following his gaze. "Remnant," Kratos growled. "A seed of what we broke. It will not stay harmless." The ember touched the sea. The water boiled outward in rings of flame and shadow. From the steam rose a shape, not as massive as the Titan, nor as infinite as the mask, but sharper, condensed, like a shard of a god made into a weapon. It stood tall as a mountain, humanoid in outline, but faceless, its chest glowing with the same eye that had stared from the cosmos. Doraemon's ears twitched. It left a piece of itself behind. Kratos tightened his grip on the chains. "Good, now we can kill it properly." The shard god moved. Each step cracked the air, each gesture twisted the tide. It was a soldier of infinity, sent to finish what the vast mask had begun. Its eye flared, and the ruins of the city lifted into the air like broken toys, raining down as weapons. Doraemon scrambled up, trembling, empty-pocketed. Then quietly he said, "I can't fight it like this, but I can give you something." Kratos glanced at him. "What?" The little blue robot reached up, unhooked the battered beam from his back, and held it out. The casing was cracked, sparks leaking from its core. "This was meant to open doors, to make escapes. But in your hands, it might make endings." Kratos took it. The weapon seemed absurdly small in his fists, like a child's toy. Yet as his rage bled into it, the beam burned brighter, reshaping itself, lengthening into a sword of pure possibility. Chains coiled around it, binding mortal invention and Godslayer wrath into one. The shard god bellowed. Its faceless head split open, revealing a spiral maw of stars. It raised its arm, and from the sky above fell a rain of meteors, tearing across the sea. Doraemon screamed, "Go!" Kratos leapt. The chainsword blazed, cutting meteors in half mid-fall. Each strike ripped light into the sky. He landed against the shard's chest, plunged the sword deep, and dragged downward. The eye cracked, light screaming outward. The monster seized him, lifted him, tried to crush him in its stellar grip. Kratos roared, straining as bones creaked, refusing to yield. I am vengeance. He thrust the sword through the shard's throat, fire exploding in all directions. Doraemon, watching from below, stumbled forward. His pocket sparked one last time. One last gadget, half-formed. A miniature door. He threw it, and it expanded midair into a black gateway beneath the shard's collapsing body. Kratos ripped free and fell as the shard screamed, dragged through the door into the void. With one last defiant explosion, the door snapped shut, taking the creature with it. Silence again. The sea calmed, this time honestly, without malice. Kratos emerged from the steam, scarred, breathing heavy, sword of possibility dissolving into sparks. Doraemon rushed to him, wobbling on his tiny legs. "You did it!" Kratos shook his head. "We did." Above them, the stars remained only stars. The fragment was gone. The mask had retreated. The Titan was ash in the waves. For now, the impossible had been won. Doraemon smiled, exhausted but real. "Arena of the impossible," he whispered. That's what this was. Kratos looked down at him, eyes hard but not unkind. "And when the next arena comes, we fight again." The two stood on the broken road above the sea, one small and round, one scarred and titanic, both outlined by fire and moonlight. And the universe, watching still, always watching, took note. Because in that moment, Doraemon and Kratos were no longer just challengers. They were champions. The waves lapped softly now, as if ashamed of their earlier fury. Smoke curled from the skeletons of towers, drifting into the night where stars blinked with feigned innocence. For the first time in hours, there was no roar, no scream, no collapse, only the sound of Kratos' heavy breath and Doraemon's uneven whir of damaged servos. The little robot sat cross-legged on the fractured stone road that still floated over the ocean. His paws pressed against his broken pocket, as though he could will it back to life. Sparks fizzled and died. "It's gone," he whispered. "Everything I had, every tool, all burned out." Kratos looked down at him, scarred arms hanging loose at his sides. His chains smoked, still hot with battle. "You had more than tools." Doraemon blinked up. His eyes shone wet in the firelight. "What do you mean? Without my gadgets, I'm nothing. I was made to help others. That's my whole—" "You helped," Kratos interrupted, voice rough as stone. "Not with toys, with will. You stood." For a long moment, Doraemon could only stare at him. Then his mouth curved into the smallest, shyest smile. "That sounds like something Nobita used to say." Kratos gave a grunt that might have been approval, but peace, in this world, was never more than an illusion. The survivors' toy train had reached the mountains, its glow faint but steady. Yet beyond the ridges, the horizon flickered, signals of armies regrouping, of cults rebuilding, of the endless tide of war preparing its next wave. Doraemon saw it and his smile faltered. "It won't stop, will it? Even after gods fall and stars crack, there's always more." Kratos turned toward the horizon, the fire in his eyes answering with certainty. "No, it never stops." He lifted one blade, its edge still dripping with abyssal ichor. "That is why we never stop." The wind shifted. From somewhere deep in the ruins came the clang of metal. Survivors not human, but stragglers of the hive, too broken to fight, too stubborn to die. Their eyes glowed faint red in the rubble, watching, waiting. Doraemon rose shakily. He had no gadgets left, no beam, no umbrella, no magic cloth. But he picked up a shard of metal, bent into the shape of a crude dagger. He held it with both paws trembling but firm. Kratos glanced at him. "You cannot kill many with that." "I don't have to," Doraemon answered. "I just have to stand." Kratos nodded once, and together, without rest, without victory songs, they walked back into the ruined city. The night was still heavy with smoke and fear, but for every survivor who peeked from the rubble, for every child who whispered about the round blue savior and the scarred god, something stronger than fear began to stir. Not hope, not yet, but defiance, the kind that grows into legend. The ruins of the shrine city still smoked, but stories were already spreading faster than the fires could die. Survivors whispered to one another as they staggered into the mountains. Tales of a blue creature who pulled bread from thin air, of a scarred god who fought the sea itself, of chains that burned brighter than suns, and a toy train that carried them through the apocalypse. By dawn, those whispers had become certainty. By dusk, certainty had become myth. Among the survivors, a little girl clutched her father's hand as she walked along the rail line that had saved them. "Papa, the round one, he promised us we'd be safe." Was he an angel? The man shook his head slowly. Not an angel, something else, but he kept his promise, and in his voice was something rarely heard in these lands. Gratitude that was stronger than fear. Among the broken foes, in the gutted cathedral, a handful of hybrids stirred. They had no priest, no orders, no godly voice to follow. Yet they remembered. The faceless titan that had shattered like glass. The blue machine that had turned toys into miracles. The ghost of Sparta who chained gods as if they were dogs. One hybrid wrote symbols in the ash. Not of the dark gods it had once served, but of the burning skull it had seen in the sky before its master fell. Even corruption had begun to shift. Among the stars, far above, where the mask of eyes had cracked, other entities stirred. Some were angered that mortals had defied them. Others were amused. One, a voice like golden static, whispered across the void. "This arena of the impossible is no accident. Realms are colliding. Champions are being chosen. Balance is shifting." And in reply came laughter, not cruel, not kind, but hungry, in the city's heart. Doraemon limped through rubble, servos whining, clutching his broken pocket. Kratos strode beside him, each step shaking dust from the ruins. They did not speak for a long time. Finally, Doraemon whispered, "I thought I was built just to help one boy with homework, bullies and mistakes. Now I'm fighting gods beside a man who killed his own pantheon." Kratos didn't stop walking. "The arena chooses, not us." "The arena," Doraemon echoed. Kratos looked at him at last, his eyes hard, but not unkind. "This is not the first impossible battle. It will not be the last. Worlds will tear holes into each other. We are dragged through those holes, forced to fight, forced to stand." Doraemon's ears twitched. "So this wasn't chance, it's a pattern." "Yes," Kratos said. He gripped his chains, letting them clink against the stones. "The arena of the impossible has no walls, no end. Only the next foe." Doraemon swallowed, staring up at the smoke-stained sky. "Then we'd better be ready." Kratos' reply was simple. "We are." Closing image. On the broken steps of the basilica, as ash drifted like snow, the two unlikely champions stood. One small, round, scarred but smiling. One tall, battered, eternal, his blades still dripping. The dawn's sun pierced the horizon, cutting fire across their silhouettes. And in that light, the impossible partnership of Doraemon and Kratos became something greater than battle. It became legend. Ash still hung in the sky, carried on the faint breeze that pushed the smell of salt and ruin through the broken city. Doraemon sat on a slab of collapsed marble, his small paws tracing circles in the dust. The pocket on his belly had gone silent, burned-out fabric trembling faintly with every movement he made, as though even it was tired. Kratos stood nearby on the steps of the shattered basilica, the chains on his arms heavy, blades buried in the stone beside him like markers for the dead. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sound was the creak of broken towers settling into themselves, and the distant whistle of the toy train that had carried the survivors away. Finally, Doraemon's voice broke the silence, low, uncertain. I was made to help children with small problems, tests, bullies, mistakes. I thought that was all I could do. But tonight, he trailed off, staring at the ruin that stretched to the sea. I'm not sure what I am anymore. Kratos' scarred face tilted toward him. His voice was the grind of stone absolute. You are what you choose to stand for. The little robot looked up at him, eyes shining faint with exhaustion, but also something steadier. And you? What do you stand for now? You've killed gods, toppled realms. Why keep fighting? Kratos drew one blade free from the stone. The metal glowed faint, still warm, with the death of impossible beasts. He stared at it as though it weighed more than worlds. Because there is always another hand reaching to crush the innocent. I know it will never end, so I end them, one by one. The wind shifted. From the rubble of the side streets came faint scraping. The broken enemies still crawling, those hybrids that hadn't fled, their eyes glowing dim red in the shadows. They weren't attacking, not yet, only watching. Doraemon stood shakily, no gadgets left to call on, only his own small body and will. He picked up a shard of steel, bent into a crude blade. It shook in his paw, but he held it firm. They're waiting, he whispered. Kratos lifted his chain, the links rattling like judgment itself. Then we do not keep them waiting. Together, the Godslayer and the round blue machine stepped down into the ruins again. Their shadows stretched long across the broken square, side by side, impossibly matched. Above them, the stars blinked as if remembering their wounds, and somewhere beyond those stars, old eyes opened once more, curious, hungry, and patient. The arena of the impossible was not finished. This was only its beginning. As the last fires of the ruined city smoldered and dawn stretched pale light across the sea, a voice rose, not belonging to any survivor, not to the Godslayer or the machine, but to memory itself, echoing like a hymn of the impossible. They say that night the heavens split, the ocean rebelled, and a city crumbled. They say a small blue machine, built only to help a boy with homework, stood before monsters and pulled miracles from toys. They say a scarred god, chains burning like judgment, defied the sea and even the stars. And they say that the two of them did not fall, but together forged a legend. Around campfires, children slept in their parents' arms, dreams untroubled for the first time in weeks. The broken cults whispered not to their fallen gods, but to the burning figures they had seen in the sky. Whispers turned to awe, awe into fear, and fear into reverence. Above, the rift in the stars sealed. But farther still, beyond the constellations, eyes remained fixed. Pieces were already being moved, unseen hands preparing the next spectacle. The arena hungers. The arena of the impossible has opened. This is not an ending, but a beginning. When worlds collide, when the impossible is summoned, there is no turning away. On the cracked road above the quiet sea, Doraemon and Kratos stood side by side. One small, one towering. One born to give, one born to destroy. Both staring into the horizon where the next battle waited. The screen fades to black. A final line glows against the void. Arena of the impossible. The next battle awaits. The screen stays black for a long, lingering breath. Only the faint sound of chains rattling and a small, mechanical heartbeat echo in the darkness. Then a final whisper. The impossible is never over. Silence. Fade out.